Hi there. I thought that it might be nice to offer a bit of a commentary over the final two races of the 2018 UCI Masters Track World Championships in the match sprint event, which happened October 13th, 2018 in LA. So I thought I'd start with a little detail about what led up to the final. On Friday, the day before, in the morning, we had our 200-meter qualifying. This was the first time that I'd done a timed 200-meter on an indoor track. The previous month in September, I was up in Canada for Canadian Nationals, but I didn't race the sprint event. I only did the 500-meter, the team sprint, and the keirin. I ended up fourth in the keirin, which was disappointing, but I took away from that I had the fitness to contest for the win, but I sort of messed up my tactics. So the World Championships were my chance for redemption, and we had set a goal 15 months ago to peak for Canadian Nationals and then to hold that peak for Masters Worlds. And then this was the final event of my season. So immediately after this, I had some time off, and we're back in sort of the building phase now for next season. So on Friday, we had the 200 meter, and I have to admit that the day before on Thursday, I did a few practice attempts, some flying 50s, we call them. So you do the normal wind up for a flying 200, and you sprint into the 200 meter timing line, and then you hold that speed for 50 meters, and then you swing up the track and ease off of it. And during my first attempt, I was going a little too slow during the within the third and fourth turn, which is what we're looking at in the camera view, and I slid down. So I train on a 250-meter track, but it's a concrete track in Rock Hill. It's an amazing track, but the tires have better grip on the concrete, so we can go slower without sliding down. And I still had tires on my wheels that were better suited for concrete racing. They're a little bit more durable. And so we didn't change over my tires to be more wood specific. And that's certainly one of the takeaways I took from this event is I really do need to be racing indoors with indoor specific tires. The reason we didn't really do that is, especially for nationals, only doing the 500 meter, the team sprint, and the keirin, you don't need to worry about going as slow as possible without slipping. All of those events, you're going as fast as possible. In the keirin, we get up to 30 kilometers an hour immediately, and then slowly keep rising the pace. And so the final few laps were definitely over 50 kilometers an hour, and you don't have to worry about having the right tires to go as slow as possible. That really only applies at the match sprint. So since we weren't planning on doing the match sprint in nationals, we just didn't change the tires over. And the thing you're trying to do in a 200-meter qualifying is you want to save as much energy as possible until you need to start using it in the final lap and a half. So I really like 333-meter tracks like Trexlertown, because you can just completely chill out until the final lap. So you get to save maximum energy. So one thing that we need to work on going forward is getting a better sense of how slow I can go to save energy in an indoor 200 meter. So for the Friday qualifying, I used a little bit too much energy to stay on the track early on in the wind up for the 200 meters. So my time was 11.9 seconds for the 200 meters, and I was doing 11.7 outdoors. And usually indoors is supposed to be about 3% faster than your outdoor times. So doing 11.9 indoors for me was a disappointment, but because it was my first time, I wasn't really upset about it. So I thought that that's just some important context for how the second seed rider, Carolien van Herrikhuyzen from the Netherlands, and I sort of stacked up. She qualified a little bit slower than me, but not significantly. So I knew that tactics were going to be really important for this race. So Friday morning, we have our 200 meter qualifying, and then in the afternoon, we had our quarterfinal sprints. So being the top seeded rider, I faced the 8 seeded rider who was just over 2 seconds slower than me in the 200 meter qualifying, which is a massive gap. So it's no one's surprise that I pretty easily won that race and didn't have to put in a whole lot of effort because 2 seconds is massive in a 200 meter. Usually anything over half a second is a really big gap. So what happens is we draw spots for the first round, and sometimes it's golf balls with a number on it. Sometimes it's popsicle sticks, which works really well. Other times it's an actual card that you flip over. And in Canada, they used an iPad that digitally helps select our positions. So it's supposed to be a random draw. And in this case, Carolien drew the first position and I drew the second position. This means that she is obligated by the rules to lead out the first half lap at least walking pace, unless I choose to try and come over the top. So that's how this starts. I, as the second position rider, could immediately go to the front if I wanted to. I've done that before. For example, in the summer at T-Town in one of the UCI races, I immediately went to the front because I wanted to control the pace. But this is how we start this. She drew first, and then in the second ride, I would be the first rider, and then we swap positions. Having drawn the second position, we have a bit of a choice for where we get brought up to at the line. So I have to go to the right of Carolien here, but we can choose to be relatively close, or in this case, I am as close to the rail as I can. In track racing, height, because of physics, gives us potential energy that makes it easier to accelerate. So me being significantly higher means that if she were to attack immediately, then I can use the banking to accelerate and save some energy. So generally, when I take the second position, I want to be as high up on the rail as I can be. And as you'll see in next round, when I draw the first position, I am pretty far up the track as well, which basically forces the other person up towards the rail to start. It just makes the start easier. My strategy for this race was to be patient. I did have a plan coming into this that if I was still in the second position and we were coming into 2 to go, passing 2 to go, that I would start winding it up, slowly accelerating and effectively jumping out of turn 4, a lot like we do for the 200 meter qualifying. But Carolien's crafty. We start the stare down, which is one of my favorite parts, and then we're off. I think what we'll do is just run the race on its own. I won't add any commentary, and then I'll rewind things, and then we'll sort of slow down in some spots and talk about what's going on. there's not a lot to do in this first bend. It takes a lot of energy to accelerate, to come up and around, so there's no point. I could stay low if I wanted to, but one of my strengths, I think, is developed from my life in badminton, where deception is a big part of the game. So I really like the mind games of match sprinting. So I like doing fakes like that one to sort of force her to come down before maybe she wanted to. And then I come up again to sort of have my options, and then she closes me off really well. She has her back wheel overlapped with my front wheel, which means that basically I have to choose whether to slow down or accelerate. If I slow down, then I can come back down under the track and keep the pace slow, or I could maybe take over the lead. But you have to make that choice before you go into turn one, because once you hit the banking, it's 45 degrees, and if you don't have enough speed, you will slip. So I chose to speed up a little bit, which takes some energy, and as we're coming through turn 1 and 2, we're going about as slow as we possibly can safely. And then coming out of turn 2, I start putting down a little bit of power in the seat, starting to accelerate, and as we come into turn 3, I'm going to stand up. I'm not really accelerating though, I'm just making it harder for her to predict what I'm going to do. One of the really important things about match sprinting is, as the follow rider, I tend to prefer in my sprints to be the one to make the first move. So I tend to do better in those cases. I tend to do better acting rather than reacting, but I've certainly won both ways. So when I get to pick, I try to like to act first. And so what I'm doing by standing up a little bit early is either enticing her to think that I'm about to jump and then she will attack a little bit earlier than she might want to, or I'm helping disguise when I actually start my acceleration. So you can see that there's this delayed response when I actually start jumping. So she is watching me, but there's no big physical difference between me standing but not accelerating and then me going full gas. So she doesn't stand up until I'm already starting to pass her. And that's why I'm able to complete the pass. It's just I'm going so much faster before she even stands up. And then out of turn 2, you stand up one more time and it's absolute full gas to the line. There's no holding back here at all. I take a little peek under my armpit to check that she's not coming past me, and then yeah, it's first round to me. I'm really happy with this. It sort of gives you a comfortable position. It's a best out of 3 match, so it's always great to win the first one. It puts the other person on the back foot. They might have to reconsider their strategy and maybe do something that they don't really want to do under ideal conditions. So winning the first one just is a massive advantage. So after this race, we have about an hour break between races. There's an entire Madison to come in between the first and second round of the final. So I happened to bring my friend's air mattress into the velodrome, so I had a bed to go lie down on, which a few people gave me a bit of a raised eyebrow and a little bit of a weird look, and about 3 seconds later, they all thought, oh my God, that's the smartest thing I've ever seen. So I got a few weird looks, but then a lot of people saying that they wish they had that. So it was pretty rad having a bed to chill out on for about an hour. About 15 minutes, 20 minutes before, well, maybe about half an hour before my next race, I'll start getting on my bike on the rollers and just keeping my legs loose. I don't really have to do a lot of warming up. I usually do like 1 or 2 rev outs, just doing some high cadence, low power, just to get the neural signals working. And then I try to finish about 15 minutes before the actual start of my next race so that I can check everything on the bike that needs to be checked, wipe down the tires, because we're indoors, and then get to the start seats about 10 minutes before my race so I can just chill out and focus. So second race upcoming, and here we are getting clipped in and then we get strapped in. The reason that most sprinters use straps in addition to our clipless pedals is it's usually a disaster to unclip at full gas at 60 kilometers an hour. These are fixed gear bikes, which means that as long as the back wheel is moving, your pedals are turning. So the amount of power that we're putting into the bike is pretty extreme, and so the risk of unclipping is a little bit higher, so we use the straps to reduce the risk of unclipping. So you can see I'm being pushed up here, and I'm going to steer pretty high onto the track. I still have to leave the other rider enough room to take the second position, so I'm a little bit more than halfway up the track, trying to just stay loose, and then because I'm there first, I'm going to start the stare down. Okay, so again, let's watch the race, see what happens. So my plan leading out is that I'd been watching Carolien in her previous rounds. I had watched the video from the previous World Championships, and I noticed that she has the ability and seems to like sprinting from a fairly long way out. And a long way out in track cycling is about 300 or more meters. And that means anyone jumping in turn 3 or so. Most of us are going to jump out of turn 4, but people who jump in turn 3 or before, that's what we consider going long. And I'd seen her do it in a few races. I know she's capable of it. She's also very crafty, so that's the one thing that I'm on guard for this race is her jumping and going long. So one of the things that we practice quite a lot is I warm up and cool down usually at a track by rolling around pretty slow on the blue band there called the Côte d'Azur, looking back and never looking forward. So we practice being able to ride around at various speeds from as slow as possible to actually sprinting while never looking forward and like being able to control where we are on the track. And that's a skill that's not too hard to develop with enough practice. The part that's harder is actually paying attention to the rider behind you. So it's one thing to be able to look back and over your shoulder you can see, for example, the blue stayers line, and you keep that in a certain part of your frame of vision, and then you can maintain your position on the track pretty easily. But it's a completely different thing to be able to ride around the track looking backwards while watching the features of the rider behind you. So you're watching for whether their shoulders tilt in or out to signal that they might start a turn. They might flex their arms You might see them stand up to initiate a sprint. So that's something that takes even more practice. You don't get to focus on where you are on the track. You have to get to a point where that just comes naturally, and you get to actually watch the person behind you. So that's something that we've spent quite a lot of time this year for me learning. So here I am watching her. You don't have to watch too intently around the first bend when we're going this slow. In order for her to come around me, she'd have to put in quite a lot of effort because we're going way too slow to get up on the steep banking here. So I'm doing it more to let her know that I can do this without looking forward. Sometimes what you see with some people is they can look over their shoulder, but then they'll every 2 seconds or so look forward, and they tend to do it in a pattern. So they'll look for 2 seconds and then look forward, look for 2 seconds and look forward. And if you're an attentive rider and behind, you can time your jump for when they start to look forward again, and then you get a good half-second jump before they can even see you, and then there's the additional latency of them reacting. So it's a bad idea to look back and then forward in a pattern in particular. But you will see me generally just never look forward. So here she's going to move up the track, much like I did in the previous round. There's nothing really for me to worry about. I'm just watching to see any sudden acceleration. She's going to do a fake like I did to her, and you see me not really do anything. And then she, right now, either has to choose to really put reverse pressure on the pedals to slow down. I mean, we can't pedal backwards, but we can sort of put back pressure. So she could slow down and come in behind me, or to avoid sliding down and slipping off the track, she has to accelerate and come over me, which is what she chooses to do. Because she's accelerating and coming over me, I stand up just for a couple easy, nothing too serious pedal strokes, just to be attentive. In case she wants to jump, I'm ready to go. And then I'm going to come up the track and then start my head game. So I'm really quite comfortable here in the second position. No worries at all. And then she comes up the track really steeply. So you can see her angling up more than 45 degrees. And I want to take advantage of this and really quickly dive under her. One of the things that we also practice is not initiating turns with my shoulders, but with my hips. So it's much more deceptive. And so I know that I've really gained a lot of speed over her because she was so sharply turning up the track that when I came sharply under her, there was that latency and reaction. And so I put in a couple pretty hard pedal strokes, thinking for a moment about going from 500 meters out, which, as you see in the race, I thought better of pretty quickly, but I did at least consider it. I thought about going from there. But I think that favors Carolien's features and strengths better than mine. So I put in those first few pedal strokes and I'm looking around, and then I swing up the track and she goes from 450 meters out. That is so far. Now, I know that I have pretty considerable height here on the track, so I don't need to panic. And one of the mistakes that most riders make in a situation like this is they try to close the gap too soon, and they want to immediately get on the front rider's wheel so they get the draft. And getting a draft is great. You're saving energy from the front person, but because these are track bikes, when you swing out on the next time around on the back straight to pass, you have to accelerate. Basically, you swing out into the wind. So you have to put out more power just to go the same speed, and now you've got to accelerate into that. You have no momentum to take advantage of. So what you really want to do is maintain a bit of a gap, 3 to 5 bike lengths, and you only start closing that in the final back straight. You don't want to start trying to pass the person until about turn 3 or 4. So here you see me accelerate, not 100%. I'm going about 85%. I'm trying to make myself about as aerodynamic as I can because, we're going a long way and she's a smaller rider than me, so I'm not getting a massive draft off of her. So I do want to make my frontal area a bit smaller, and all I'm doing is really trying to be patient. The natural tendency is to just close that gap and try to pass too soon. I've made that mistake in the past. This is something that we've also practiced a lot, and I usually get it wrong, but this time it was right. So out of turn 2, as soon as we start finishing the steep part of the banking, I can stand up, and it's 100% from here to the line. So I start making the pass. I'm coming into her slipstream, and then that's what we call the slingshot. So I'm going to come into her slipstream, and then when my front wheel is about to hit her back wheel, I will swing out, and I'm going to try and stay as close to her as I can, because going around a bend, the outer rider has to go farther. But I didn't quite nail being as close to her as I could have been. I swing out a little bit wider right here than I wanted to. But yeah, I think it's a pretty cool shot that on tracks like this, we're not quite horizontal, but it's pretty close, and it's really cool to ride around 60 kilometers an hour plus, almost going sideways. And as we're coming into turn 4, I audibly said to myself, "Come on." I don't know if she could hear it. I mean, it's pretty intense in there, and we have our helmets on that cover our ears. But I did say to myself out loud, "Come on," to make this pass, because it is really hard to keep putting down power seated on these big gears that especially I ride. But I'm starting to make the pass here, and with about 15 meters to go, because the way track bikes work, that when you're passing someone, generally you're going to keep passing them. It's really hard for that other person to accelerate, especially at the end of a really long sprint like this. So that's why I'm making the pass, and with 15 meters to go, like, I know I've won. And I was just completely elated. I'm so proud of this win. I'm really proud of the World Championship, but particularly this race and the way it worked out. This particular race really did take all of those 15 months of training that we've been doing, the multiple training camps that I've traveled to, the other coaches that we've consulted with, my 2 full-time coaches, all the video I watch, all the thinking about this that I do, training twice a day, 15, 20 hours a week. Every bit of that went into this particular ride, and especially practicing being patient and then making this pass is such a complicated balance, because you need to leave this gap, but if you leave too big of a gap, you can't close it, and if you leave too small of a gap, then it's too hard to make the pass, and so it's this really razor thin margin to get this right. So the fact that this is the race that I won the World Championship on just makes it even more valuable for me. And then after the race, it's traditional for people who don't hate each other to shake hands, which we do. And Carolien does this extra gesture once she comes past me to motion me forward. And I sort of smile here because, like, I'm dead tired. I've got nothing left in my body. And now I have to accelerate up to her to grab her hand. So I was sort of laughing about, oh God, now I've got to accelerate. And then she holds my hand over the line, which I thought was just a really lovely gesture. You might think that the 200-meter time for our final sprint at 12.9 is pretty slow, and it's certainly not fast. But because we were going from so long out, the speed will be a bit lower. But this is it. That's my World Championship. This was the end of my season. Because I'm not racing on the World Cup this year. Immediately after this, I took my 10 days off and, back in the gym, back on the bike, and yeah, getting ready for next season. First race might not be until Easter and maybe Trinidad and Tobago. So thanks for watching.